Welcome. It's the environmental art and landscape architecture debate for Landscape Matters. Just to explain, the objective of Landscape Matters is to sort of take the debate and the ability to publish a little bit beyond our usual landscape architecture discipline and extend it to other people who are interested in landscape, whether they be writers or artists or just any member of the public who's interested in landscape, and solicit their opinions on matters as well. That's its sort of unique selling point, that it goes beyond our own professional silo if you're a landscape architect. The Landscape Matters started in November as an online journal, which you may have seen. And then so we have that 4 times a year, and we have a debate 6 times a year, usually with an article beforehand. Moving on to this evening's debate, the idea started with how does environmental art fit with the sort of curriculum and practice of landscape architecture, or how you interpret landscape architecture if, say, you're a garden designer, perhaps just landscape design or any form of man-made manipulation of the landscape I count as landscape design, whether it's planning, management, or design. But I think it's first of all, it's quite important to define what we mean by environmental art. And if you go by the sort of textbook definition, it's quite tight, and it describes it as the movement that sort of followed on from land art being quite a minimal practice of changing land often in conjunction with quite simple geometric shapes. And it defines environmental art as the movement that moved on to extend that to climatic and biodiversity issues that concern us now over the last 10, 20 years. However, if you're narrow in your definition, you leave out lots of good stuff, like artists who only operate in the art gallery realm, who are also dealing with environmental art issues. So for this evening, I want to keep the definition quite broad to any artist operating with a landscape theme that has environmental issues and concerns that they deal with in their work. So the format of this evening is I'll introduce this through a series of fairly quick slides, visual slides, introduce the subject matter and the main speakers. And after the slideshow, the main speakers will have a dialogue which will start to answer the objective of the debate, which is, what is the relationship between landscape architecture and environmental art, and where is it now and where is it going to? The two latter things being quite contentious at the moment. And then after that mini debate, then I'll take questions from the chat line from the audience and feed them to those speakers. So when those speakers start dialoguing, please put your questions in the chat line and I'll pick them up. The origins of environmental art. Well, as I mentioned before, it started with the movement on from land art. Land art was in various decades, but principally in the 1960s. Quite a lot of it was in America. As I said, it was concerned with shifting landform, making statements of contrast or conjunction with nature, quite geometrically, quite minimally. And so you've got spiral jetty pieces like that. However, as I said, environmental art came along where there was a need to say more about the current problems of environment. And so there are multiple examples of artists who picked that up from the sort of 1960s onwards. But just taking one or two, one of my favorites is to start with Joseph Beuys, the German who's now deceased, German artist, who's also a professor of sculpture and a prominent member of the German Green Party. So he was an artist and a politician, really. And he interpreted art in the environment as meaning sort of performance art. So he did both lectures, publishing, political activism, gallery art. But what he's famous for is his performance art, his environmental performance art. So you see a little image of him, and a lot of that was quite disruptive. He thought you needed to make a point by being disruptive, otherwise people wouldn't take any notice. And he was right. The press jumped all over it. So here you see him with some volunteers digging holes in the local corporation car park and replacing each parking space with a tree and a commemorative rock in the middle of the night. Another performance art he did was the interpretations of beating the boundaries around woodlands and buildings. He even objected to a motorway flyover that was being planned in Germany, and he said he counted the number of hedgehogs that would be killed as a result of this motorway flyover. He took the equivalent weight in animal fat and shoved it on this underside of the new motorway. Moving on to other artists who were quite influential. We've got the likes of Chris Drury, which is top left slide. This is Chris Drury's a land artist. This is called Waves and Time in Yorkshire, the top left slide, in 2011. Basically, what he was alluding to is ancient glacial flows with a series of ruts in the landscape, gentle landforms over several acres in a fold, and the fold gathered water, which became a new dew pond. On the top right, you've got what's called global warming, Greenhouse Britain, which is 2009 by Helen Mayer and Newton Harrison. This actually, if anything, is the closest to what we do or should be doing, because it crosses the boundaries between geography, art, science, and landscape architecture. And it's a sort of alternative narrative that speaks of Great Britain's response to water levels rising, forms that new settlement could take. It was funded by a DEFRA grant and became an exhibition about 12 years ago. And what you're looking at is one of 4 phases of the exhibition. And then the bottom 2 pictures are Agnes Dean, and bottom left in particular is 1992. It's called Tree Mountain in Finland, and it was part of a land reclamation scheme where they literally built a new mountain as part of the art, and that was funded by the United Nations Environment Fund and the Finnish Ministry of Environment. And that's a man-made mountain where they planted 11,000 trees by 11,000 people, and is the biggest scheme in the world, or was at the time, of its type. And then bottom right again is Agnes Dean. It's called Wheatfields, 1982 in Battery Park, New York, a temporary installation of a wheat field as an act of confrontation, juxtaposition of agriculture with New York City, and you can see in the background that's the Twin Towers that don't exist anymore. So quite prophetic. Then moving on. These are just a few of my slides from my work. Interesting, I hadn't really analysed where I was coming from until thinking of this possible debate. And then I realised that actually what I was subconsciously doing is neither environmental art nor land art. It's like somewhere in between. So I've become a historian's kind of enigma on that, in that you can see bottom right, it's very traditionally land art. in that, it has its reminiscent of Robert Smithson's Buried Woodshed, very land art, and has those simple forms cutting into the landscape so that as you descend, your view ascends to the heavens. But in this case, the reason I put it in is because it has an environmental art dimension as well, in that its concerns are with green burial, rather than burying people 6 feet under in plots, which is very unsustainable practice. It's about the green burial. And you can see it's about the cycle of life, big tree, small tree, and then a kind of coffin-shaped hole. The roots grow onto the deceased body and suck it up into the tree. So it's about green burial, references to land art, and actually that American program years ago called 6 Feet Under, that was Westonbirt Festival of Art 2004. Bottom left and top left is Hyneham Court in Gloucestershire, 2009, for private clients, where he wanted a standard form of land art in scale with the landscape. But the reason I put it in is because it's got an environmental art twist, in that instead of just mown lawn, like bottom right, it's got wildflowers, and because the soil was quite impoverished, you've got poppies coming up as well. So it's a kind of land art with a twist. And then continuing with that theme of transitioning from land art towards environmental art, there's some of Professor Andrew Stonier's work. On the left, you've got Pulse, which is 21 years ago, 2000, in Four Lanes End station in Newcastle. That's a 6-meter diameter disc with a ring of caution steel on it, and then a neon light around that again, a neon tube. And it responds to, it responds to noise of trains, and the greater the noise, the greater the pulse. And if there's no noise, you just get a continuous band of light. So I really have a real affinity with this, but in a way it's not what you call straight environmental art, in that it hasn't got a concern about rising water levels, climate change or biodiversity. But in the strictest sense, it is environmental art because it responds directly to its surroundings, its environment. And as you'll see from the explanation of some other slides, that is the first stage of connecting to the wider environmental problems. You have to connect to the immediate surroundings. And then that's a gateway into understanding the wider environmental issues that you're trying to lay a clue for as an artist. So on the top right, we've got the Basque sculptor, Chillida, and that's 1977, Comb of the Wind, a series of large rusty steel kind of grappling hooks coming out of rock that was set in rock in San Sebastian, iron grappling hooks. Making this wonderful, I've only included one of the slides, but there are a series of them, making this wonderful dialogue with the waves as they come up, and interaction with that, and the views and people, and the landscape extends across the granite. There's a platform next to it. So you can see that is the first stage of appreciating issues towards environment, that you just get people to look at it. And then bottom right, Andrew Stonier was chair of the art trail in the Forest of Dean, now is still a trustee, not the chair. So that's from the Forest of Dean Trail, and by Neville Gaby, 2001, now being decommissioned. You can see it's a tree, and it was funded by Southwest Arts and the Forestry Commission and the Arnolfini Trust, and it's basically the volume of a tree reconstructed in a large cube, or re-represented. And it changes, or it did change with the seasons. And the stump of the old tree is nearby. So moving on again to Edward Hutchinson, who's also one of our speakers, along with the people from the previous slides. Edward, as well as managing Landscape Matters with me and co-founding it with me, is an artist as well. And rather interestingly, there is a transition between different types of landscape art I can see in these images. So the images on the left are from Coventry Peace Garden. And it's a landscape that extends the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum. And you can see the corten steel slabs with water jet cut lettering in it. And basically the slabs delineate the party walls of medieval houses that used to be on the site, and the lettering indicates the names of the inhabitants. This is just one element of the design, but it makes a beautiful kind of dialogue with the ruined church behind. And then as a complete contrast, and more recently on the right, Edward's taken to doing paintings. So the reason why this one fits these two is because they're inspired by microbes and other paintings, worms. And they do kind of make the micro macro in that they're kind of taking an element of landscape soil, which is treated literally like dirt and forgotten and becomes impoverished. And they're saying, actually, at a microscopic level, it's really interesting, you know, the structure of the soil and the little pathways that microbes take through it. And at different levels, you can appreciate it just as an almost beautiful childish painting, watercolor, or a sort of scientific level. You can recognize patterns. And Edward has successfully exhibited and sold these. So it's quite clever of him, I think. And then moving on to Scott, who's also one of our speakers in a minute. Scott, I know from teaching at the University of Gloucestershire and elsewhere, is very much in the kind of community mode. And so top right, this is very much him in his usual manner of, this is Bracknell Dust Waters, and it's about exploring through poetry the qualities and distinctiveness and myths of the surrounding forests with residents in that district, Bracknell Dust Waters, 2016. So Scott is very much concerned with environmental issues, but uses it collaboratively with communities to get their ideas rather than imposing it as an artist. And it accompanied that with a series of poems as well. And then the other images are other interesting projects in a similar vein with the community participation edge to them. Moving on to Catherine D. Catherine is another former landscape architect, still a landscape architect, lecturer, but artist. And what's interesting, and the reason why we've included her, is that she only wanted to show the sort of art gallery images and not any physical works, even though she has done physical works. And the reason why this is interesting is when we come to the debate in a minute, we want to elicit, is that enough? And the answer is, I think it is, because as landscape architects, we do drawings and we do images and models and paintings. And if that has an artistic intention that's fulfilled without physically building it, then that's good art. And that's what Catherine specializes in now. So in this case, we've got top left is White Beam Days. It's an outside drawing installation in Sweden. And what Catherine's said to me about it is they're postcard-like illustrations, a bit bigger than postcards though. And this in particular, this one is about the narrative from the point of view of trees. and almost as though the trees have human qualities, so that's a form of personification. And these trees lined the seafront in Trelleborg development district and in Sweden. And so quite recently this year, and the trees were threatened with removal, ironically to be replaced with sea defences. So it sets up this sort of contradiction of you're trying to defend a community against the sea, but you have to remove a part of nature in order to do it. So which is more important? What are your sort of priorities? And the one on the top right is We Sang For You. All of these images evoke place history. And so the bottom right one is We Are Watching, and the bottom left one is Tomorrow Unheard. Catherine, have I left anything out? Do you want to add anything?
No, that's good. They were installed on site on large scale, and they're still there. But it's a temporary exhibition, yeah. But yeah, it's supposed to be postcard-like, and yeah, you said it well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then Trudy Entwistle, a little bit like Kathy, is former lecturer and landscape architect and landscape artist. And this one, the two on the left are part of the Watershed Project 2012 to 14. And it's part of the Upstream exhibition in the South, and the subject matter is in the South Pennines. Basically, what Trudy said is it's combining ecology with aesthetics. It's sort of meeting point of ecology and aesthetics, so sort of science and design, and done very much as a collaborative project. And you can see that the sort of sub-theme is this ripple going through the landscape and the interaction with water and climatic issues. Then the top right was 2016, a residency in Brittany, working with green blooms. You can see this sort of curvaceous form of a green bloom, which isn't just particular to Brittany. It's a worldwide phenomenon that we get these sort of green tides. But it's not necessarily a healthy phenomena. It's blooms of macroalgae, a result of human activity like over-intensive farming. So to make something aesthetically pleasing out of it, it sets up that sort of dialogue and that contradiction. And then bottom right, we've got she calls the space in between, which is, I think, a lovely title, because we'll come to whether environmental art is treated quite marginally, and therefore the space in between is that space often that artists grab. This is South Carolina Botanic Gardens, 2000, and it's in a woodland of oak, hickory, beech woodland, and you've got these clay elliptical mounds, a little bit like ant hills actually, with moss growing over them, and they cascade down the valley, as though they've got a sort of life of their own. Okay, so that's my kind of introduction to where we're coming from, and a little window into environmental art currently on some projects the audience may not have seen, because I'm not picking out huge famous global names. I'm picking out the names of the speakers.